Kane, we need to step through this. I mean, yesterday we spoke about the current spate of injuries in the game, the fact we're only in January, the fine line, as Harry Mackay told Jared, of preparing as sides need to battle harden yourself for the long season versus the risk of injury. So many clubs, the Blues, the Saints, the Bombers, the Roos with George Wardlaw yesterday, the Dogs with Jason Johannisen yesterday, Richmond and many more have released injury updates that have had high-profile casualties. The Lions have had some postseason surgeries. They won't start match practice until a week or so in the next month. They've played 4 weeks longer the last 2 years and yet started their home and away campaigns a week earlier the last 2 years. So it's a very tight runway. So we spend some time on that. And I feel like people say it's always like this. And maybe the conversation is similar, but it's not. I think this is becoming a very, very hot topic indeed. And to illustrate that fact, I was contacted yesterday by one high-performance boss who heard our chat yesterday before I reached out and contacted another. And without hesitation, these two guys provided me with a laundry list of gripes they had with the way the off-season and the pre-season calendars looked. A calendar, they say, makes this sort of injury rate inevitable and, in fact, a disaster waiting to happen if it isn't already in their eyes. Now, I'm just not sure how aware or how much they care, the average fan, with this sort of stuff. But we're going to step through it.
We are going to step through it. And it's been one of my biggest frustrations for a long time. I actually have been writing about this for 7 years because I Googled an article that I had written and it came up 7 years ago. I couldn't believe it. Where's the time gone? But players get far too much time off. And the lack of preparation is leading to this significant spate of injuries. And clubs have had enough. You're right. You've spoken to people. I've spoken to coaches before. I've spoken to high performers. But they say they just do not have enough time with the players and to prepare the players. I mean, we all remember this little clip from Lyon, which I was staggered by.
Our environment's really important. We'd like to think we give them a lot of time off. I think they get 3.5 days a week off. You know, so 16 hours in and game day. So I think that's as healthy as almost in the comp. So when they're in here, try and make it sharp, keep it balanced.
16 hours a week. And so I've always thought, I'm gonna get to the bottom of this. So I've done some digging around in terms of how much leave does an AFL player get. So the person listening right now who's got a normal job, who gets their 4 weeks off per year, get ready to be staggered by this. So I've just used North Melbourne as an example because they didn't play finals. Mm-hmm. Their last game was on August the 24th. They returned to pre-season training, the 5+ years players. So if you've had 5 years of service, they returned on the 25th of November. So 12 weeks.
Yep.
12 weeks holiday there in the off-season. They then trained for 3 weeks, Sammy. 3 weeks before Christmas. They broke up on December 19th. So they've had 3 weeks training. They then returned post-Christmas on January 9. So there's another 3 weeks holiday. So we're up to 15 weeks already, and we're in January. Their first pre-season game is on February the 22nd. So they have 5.5 weeks of training from Jan 9 to February 22 to prepare the players after Christmas. That is 8.5 weeks for the year to get ready for the most difficult sport to play in the world, that is the most physically demanding. And 8.5 weeks is not enough. So it's no wonder the high-performance staff you're speaking to, the coaches that we're speaking to, speak to a coach off the record, so we just don't have enough time with the players. Now, I've got out the AFL Players Handbook, and Ross is right. So these are some of the guidelines that are in the collective bargaining agreement. This is the legal document between the players and the AFL, and clubs cannot stray from this. So people say, why don't the clubs just get him in more? They're not allowed to. It's against the law. Pre-season training. Prior to Christmas, training is limited to 4 days per week. You can only have the players 4 days per week. So they've already got their 17 weeks holiday. Then you have 3 days off per week in pre-season. Christmas leave, you'll receive 3 weeks leave over Christmas. You cannot return before January 6th. Mini breaks. You will receive 2 4-day breaks between your return from Christmas leave and the conclusion of pre-season games. So on top of all the leave you get, then you get a couple more 4-day breaks.
Yeah, I think it's down to 1 now, but it's definitely mandated, the mini break, absolutely. Look, and broadly speaking, this is what the clubs say. The players have more time off now than they have ever had before. And there's clubs out there that don't get a full week of training in, this being Monday to Saturday, uninterrupted, between Christmas and their first preseason game. So all those leave periods you mentioned, we can chuck a couple other things on top of that. There's the first-year induction camps.
Correct.
There's the AFL Players Association induction camps. There's the Captain's Day. There's the photo shoots and video shoots for the broadcasters and whatever else. These things are particularly felt by the non-Victorian clubs too, given the travel and the time away required for all of those things, so they don't get their players access to that. And all of this, all the things you mentioned, is coming with the game clearly harder than it's ever been, clearly faster than it's ever been. And it's both of those things because the AFL have created the rules for it to be played as such. So a lot of the clubs and their high-performance teams are feeling the pressure to ramp training up earlier than they otherwise would, just to ensure their players are actually properly equipped for the season and what it's going to hit them.
Yeah, it's almost an impossible task for these high-performance staff and the coaches to get this ready. And then on top of all of that, particularly if you're a young club like Richmond, you imagine the amount of time that needs to be spent on education. Like, how are we going to play? What does it take to be an AFL player? Like, there's hours and hours that is spent on development with the development coaches in groups. There's leadership meetings. Now, that is all included in your time at the footy club that takes you off the training track. So the Ross figure of 16 hours, now that's in season, not pre-season, sort of makes sense because that's all they're really allowed to have, the players. In season day off, your club must schedule a day off each week, which must not be the prior to a game or a travel day. Like, they just do not have enough access to the players. And for the average wage, which is set to explode, and the amount of benefits that the players have, there's retirement schemes, there's all types of things. I think we're setting our players up to fail because once they hit the real world, then it's, geez, I get my 4 weeks off now. I don't get my 20 weeks anymore. I don't get my 3 days off per week. I don't get my mandatory 4-day breaks throughout my working life. We're setting these players up not only to fail physically, but I think also mentally when they actually hit the real world. If the average AFL lifespan is 4 to 5 years, doesn't last long, and you go, bang, now I'm in the real world. What a shock it is. It's just gone way too far, and the AFL Players Association have far too much power in the game. And who's going to stand up to them, Sammy? Like, because the players aren't. The players are, what, you want to give us less time? No way. This is what we get. And the AFL can't because they're negotiating the pay and how much to give the players and how much to keep. So I'm not sure what the answer is here.
Oh, there it is. That was volcano worthy.
So
a lot of text coming through.
So if you're wondering why everyone's getting injured and why it's never been worse, Ridley and Sam Walsh and Yo and Wardlaw and Philippo and Marshall, you've mentioned a lot of them. This is why.
A lot of text coming through along a similar line. Kane, are you saying that when the players are not at the club, they're not doing anything? That's from Paul. Aren't players required to train away from the club with their own programs? That's from Mike. So they are given programs, right? But they are trusted and relied upon to stay in good shape over particularly the Christmas period and the off season. And most players will adhere to that, but not everyone. No. And the clubs don't know because the clubs are actually forbidden from contacting players during these breaks.
You can't monitor them either.
They cannot be contacted. They cannot be spoken to. They cannot be called. Are you doing this? Are you doing that? That's forbidden as well. So, look, all of this as well, I've got to add with, and I know we bang on about the soft cap, but the soft cap hasn't changed a lot. Like, the football department's salary cap still funded at around $2 million less than it was pre-COVID, with the cost of living, as we know, going up at the same time. So a club's ability to make more with less factors into it. And I know we spoke about the Lions finishing later and starting earlier the last 2 years, but the 10 non-finalists, think of it like this. Their seasons end in late August, like you say, with North Melbourne. Their senior players return November 20-something. The grand finalists, like Brisbane, they finish their season 5 weeks later, but they start their senior players pre-season only 1 week later. So you've got a situation where the best teams in the league are actually training up to a month more than the worst teams in the league. So it actually makes no sense at all.
And the text is right, and some players are more professional than others. And you get an insight into some of that. Like, Will Ashcroft gives great social media updates of how hard he works on his game. Petrarca's another one. Now, a lot of that is brand funded, I get it, but there's different levels of professionalism out there. Some would do hardly anything. And don't tell me they're training at the intensity that they need to. Like, go and try and kick a footy on your own if you're a player who lives in the country, or I saw Ivan Soldo go on a ski trip in his Christmas break. You reckon Big Ivan took a Sharon and was kicking the footy in the snow? Now, I may be wrong, but I'm doubtful that Ivan Soldo was kicking a Sharon in the snow over his Christmas break and rehabbing his knee like he needs to. Some of the things that players get up to, honestly, blows my mind that they would even think to post a ski trip on social media in the Christmas break when you've hardly played and you've wanted out of the footy club and tried to be traded and you haven't. I would have been training if I was Big Ivan. So there's different levels of professionalism in the game, and you just can't train at the intensity that is required when you're on your own, or whether you're on the ski slopes of Canada in your Christmas break.
So what are your thoughts? What do you think listening this morning? The open line's 1300 736 736. Just to summarise, we think it needs a good look at. So the AFL, the AFLPA, the clubs, there's obviously a need to satisfy all the stakeholders, and the players are the most important stakeholder in the game. They do need to be looked after, but there is some frustration out there, and we're seeing the injuries at the moment, which some in clubland, I can tell you, say are a direct result of less contact hours at clubs.
Yeah, and we'll speak to, Andrew Russell will be the best person to speak to about that when he joins us this morning. But just the final point on this, and I've said this a couple of times over the last few years, but you reckon Rafa Nadal went 20 weeks without hitting a tennis ball, like at any stage through his career? No, he would hit balls for 5 hours a day most days of the year. Like, I reckon that he may have a few days off per year. He would be hitting balls, training every single day. You go and spend some time with an Australian marathon runner or an Olympian who don't really earn an income from their sport. They train every single day, multiple times per day. Like, they're running up to 200 Ks a week. They're doing Pilates. They're in the gym, and they don't get paid. Like, our players just have no idea how good they've got it. And I just think the product would be better, and they would actually be better for it in their life as well as their bodies and preparing themselves for the season if they just took a little bit of power back from the AFL Players Association. Ridiculous.
Tony's in Craigieburn. Keen to hear your thoughts on this. Are we on an island, Kane and I, or are you? Can you at least relate to this? Do you have a concern at all, or is it a mountain out of a molehill? Tony, welcome to you.
Yeah, good morning, boys. Look, just a quick one from me. A solution might be to go back to the unlimited interchange, where guys get a good rest during game time, and maybe they can get back to the game's going so quick and injuries are happening on field. Just, I guess, Kane, what are your thoughts on?
I'd go the other way. I'd go the other way. I'd limit interchange. I think, Tony, if you increase interchange, that increases the speed, because every time a player comes back on, they've had their 3 or 4 minutes off and they're fresh, so they can then go at those crazy speeds. Where if you reduce the interchange, they don't get as much break, which fatigue sets in, which means the intensity isn't there and it slows the game down just because physically the players can't compete at those levels when they're fresh.
Thanks, Tony. Josh is out in Sunbury. Morning, Josh.
Morning, boys. How are we?
We're well.
Kane, I love you, mate, and I could not agree any more with this. I've argued so long about this. These blokes, on average, are getting paid more, if not the same as most CEOs. If they want more of a work-life balance, if they want 3 days a week off, then maybe leave your job and maybe just go do a 9-to-5 job in an office, see how hard it is, because they can go work 3 kilometres down in a mine, they can go work in a classroom, they can go become a police officer instead. Yes, I know it's high pressure, but when you're earning 300-400K, when you get all the glitz and glamour of being an AFL player, it's crazy. I'm a Carlton supporter, and these injuries are just doing my head in. As a member, falls down $1,000 a year. It just does my head in that the club can't contact them when they're injured.
Yeah, 20 weeks seems... I sort of had it up roughly to 20 weeks, plus the amount of leave you get in season. That does seem extreme. Like, there's a balance there somewhere, Sammy, for these players to have time to educate themselves, go to university or do whatever, work, have business interests, so you're prepared after footy. But the balance is swung far too far.
I'm not saying this is the answer, but when you were playing, particularly in your early days, you would have been required. So they're required back now late November. You would have been a month earlier than that easily, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
You would have been October.
I actually saw Tom Logan on the weekend, former teammate of mine. We were talking exactly about that, and you hate to go back in my day. You hate to do it without having the exact dates, but geez, you went back early and you trained right up until sort of Christmas Eve, and then you were back early January. And the thing that was different is you didn't have the mandatory breaks, the 4-day breaks, and the time off in season,
which is all written into the CBA now and all very unionised. And look, the AFLPA, for the reason they exist, is for those sort of things, and they do a really good job of it, maybe even too good a job of it.
And they used to send us away in the off season. It was the first time, sort of when the GPS watches first came in. I remember having this huge Garmin, which was like a calculator on my wrist, and you had to download all your training from your off season, send it into the club, and Darren Burgess could monitor it. You'd go into the club to get your skin folds measured in your time off. So it was completely different. Now I'm not sure how the injury rates correlate to those times, but clearly there's a lot of frustration at Clubland that they don't have enough access to the players, and I understand.